Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is David Ropp, and I have the privilege of serving as chairman of the Chesapeake Alliance. On behalf of our board of directors and membership, thank you for joining us for today's educational forum, Understanding Data Centers. The strong turnout this morning reflects the importance of this topic to our community, and we appreciate everyone who has taken the time to join us. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a special welcome and thank you to the elected officials who have joined us this morning. We appreciate your willingness to invest your time in learning more about this important topic and participating in this community conversation. If you are currently serve in elected public office, would you please stand so that we may recognize and thank you for your service and commitment to the citizens of Chesapeake and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you for your leadership and for your commitment to the future of Chesapeake. I would also like to thank our Data Center Task Group members and everyone who worked behind the scenes to make today's program possible. Founded in 1996, the Chesapeake Alliance has a long history of bringing together business leaders to help shape the future of Chesapeake. Since 2022, we have expanded our efforts to provide business leaders with a stronger voice in community and economic development issues. If you're interested in learning more about the Chesapeake Alliance, please pick up one of the programs on your table, scan the QR code on the back. As discussions about data centers have emerged across Virginia and here in Chesapeake, our members recognize the need for a fact-based educational forum where community members could hear directly from experts and better understand the rapidly growing industry. The Chesapeake Alliance believes that informed communities make better decisions. We want to be clear that today's event is not intended to advocate for or against any specific data center project, proposal, or outcome. Rather, our goal is to provide information, encourage understanding, and foster informed discussions so that community members and decision makers can evaluate these issues based on facts and expert perspectives. Data centers represent significant private investment and can generate substantial tax revenue for local governments. At the same time, residents have raised important questions regarding land use, infrastructure, energy consumption, environmental impacts, and quality of life. These are important topics deserving thoughtful discussion. Today's program is designed to provide information, answer questions, and help our community better understand both the opportunities and the challenges associated with data centers. To help us accomplish this goal, we have assembled an outstanding group of speakers representing a variety of disciplines and perspectives. Their biographies and background information can be found in today's program located on your table. Because we have a full agenda and a significant amount of material to cover this morning, we will not be taking live questions from the audience. However, we absolutely want to hear from you. Also on your table, you will find a handout with a QR code that allows you to submit questions at any time during today's event. Our moderators will review those questions and when possible, present them to our panelists. If we are unable to address your questions during today's event, it will still be reviewed by our panelists. Responses to unanswered questions will be compiled and posted on the Chesapeake Alliance website following the event. As a reminder, today's program is being recorded in its entirety. The full presentation, along with selected excerpts and additional resources, will be made available on our website so that others in the community may benefit from this information as well. We'll begin this morning by setting the stage with an overview of the data center industry, its growth, and the factors communities consider when evaluating these projects. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Chris Lloyd. Chris Lloyd is Senior Vice President and Director of Infrastructure and Economic Development at McGuire Woods Consulting, widely recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on data center development and site selection. Chris works with companies and communities across the country to evaluate infrastructure needs, implement industry best practices, and balance economic opportunity with the interests and priorities of local residents. Please join me in welcoming Chris Lloyd.
Thanks, David, and it really is a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I want to first start with thanking the Chesapeake Alliance and the leadership here. I travel all across the country doing economic development projects, not just data centers. In fact, yesterday I was in Galveston, Texas. Governor Abbott announced a project we've been working on for 2 years. They're going to build literally icebreakers in Texas. Think about that for a minute. And I get to see a lot of communities all across the country. And I wish so many of the companies that or communities that I work with had this sort of educational effort, not just on data centers, but also on the pressing issues facing a community. Because education is so absolutely important right now in the economic development world and with regards to just public policy issues. Because I think you will see, and it's certainly with this issue, that there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of hysteria, a lot of concern. And the education that this group fosters is absolutely awesome. So what I'm going to talk about is just give an overview of data centers, Data Center 101, and talk a little bit about the policies related to data centers in Virginia and nationally. Because you're going to hear a lot of terminology, and I don't run through this to think that you're dumb, but there's a lot of activities and a lot of terminology. It's moving very, very fast in data centers. So I really want to walk through it so that you have the basis so that the rest of the discussion today will make a little bit more sense. I'll start with talking about the magnitude of what's going on in the data center and AI world right now. And this is a study that was done by McKinsey late last year that looked at the amount of investment that will be spent on data centers worldwide between now and 2030. And even their mid-range scenario estimates that you're going to see $5 trillion worth of economic or investment in data centers and the power to support it globally over the next few years. Much of that happening in the United States. And the Wall Street Journal did this analysis that looked at the impact of what just the investment by the four big companies, that would be Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, and Alphabet, is relative to the size of the US economy. And they compared it to the space race back in the 60s. And the space race, and just think what the space race did for the economy of Hampton Roads and Langley and the other assets. And heck, think of all the advancements we got in technology because of the space race. We got Tang and Velcro, if nothing else, out of it. And the space race was 0.2% of the US GDP at the time. The spending by the data center companies right now is 2% of the US economy. If that spending was not happening, the US would be in recession. Virginia would be in deep recession if we didn't have this investment. So again, just want you to understand the magnitude of what's going on. When you ask, well, why are these companies building this? And everybody's worried about the bubble that may exist. And who knows if there could be a bubble. Remember, in the early 1900s, there were 2,000 car companies as well. So there's certainly going to be a shakeout, but that doesn't mean that there's not the demand for it. And what's driving the demand? You are. Think about your daily life. Every home in America, the average, has 16 connected devices to the internet. Think about your car for a moment. Your car is a mobile data center. Not my car. I drive a 2005 Honda Accord. I hit 409,000 miles on it coming down here. The most sophisticated thing on it is the cruise control, which works intermittently. But think about your smartphone, or think about Netflix, or think about when was the last time you went to a bank physically? When was the last time you talked to a stockbroker? When was the last time you talked to a travel agent? All that's moving online. And think about all the activities that continue to move online. Think about what we will have when we have autonomous vehicles in this country. Just think how much automation there is occurring on the factory floor and distribution facilities now. That is significantly driving the demand for data centers because that information doesn't just exist in the cloud, meaning in the air, or exist on your phone. It exists in data centers. So let's look at, there are already nearly 5,000 data centers across the country, either developed or under construction. They are everywhere. As you see, Virginia has the greatest concentration with 736 data centers. Texas isn't far behind. Georgia's catching up, so is Ohio and Illinois. These are everywhere. And they are really now the infrastructure that supports the modern economy in the globe. In Virginia, we have them all over the state. Every corner of the state is being shaped by them. And this chart is even a couple of months old. This is from the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, and it doesn't reflect some of the most recent announcements by Google in Botetourt County, this new Stack project in Danville, and others that are spreading across the state. And Virginia, as you saw, has the largest concentration in the country. So what is a data center? It's not very exciting, folks. This is what it looks like inside the black box. Lots of wires, beeping and blinking, servers and racks. This is what it is. It takes people to administer it, but your data, your information, your photos, your music, your movies, everything, the transactions you engage in is just taking place in buildings full of this. Not very exciting, but again, absolutely essential to the functioning of the modern economy. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of terminology just to establish a baseline for the discussion later today. And there are various types of data centers. First, you have the cloud and storage facilities. So again, where you think your photos are, or where music is, or where the other activities that are just storing information for download and retrieval. Those are, again, usually referred to as cloud or storage facilities. For those facilities, again, time is important, but not essential. You can wait 13 nanoseconds for your photos to download. Now, for some people, that may be a little bit too long, but it's not absolutely critical that you have access to that information immediately. As opposed to an enterprise facility, which is usually your banking and your stock and your other things that require instantaneous access to information. I'm old enough, I remember when we would go to Kmart growing up in Richmond, when you used your credit card at the time, or some people still call them charge cards, they would look through a book to see whether your card was valid or not. There was a little paper book that the cashier would pull out and flip through to see if your card was stolen or fraudulent. Now, of course, all that happens electronically, and it has to happen very, very quickly. And these are held in enterprise data centers. So Visa, MasterCard, American Express have these facilities that process transactions very, very quickly. And then finally, you have the AI data centers. Again, those are using large language models and generative AI to aggregate and process information. Time, again, is very important, but not absolutely essential the way it is for some of those enterprise facilities. So I wanted you to understand, okay, those are the types of data centers, so you understand the type of terminology. You then think about the various categories of data center developers that exist in this country. And the first term you'll hear is hyperscalers. And the hyperscalers are the big six: Google, AWS, Meta, Microsoft, Oracle, and OpenAI. These are the ones that are developing mostly cloud and storage facilities around the country to support everything you're doing online. Every time you check your Facebook page, every time your kids check in on Snapbook, I call it Snapbook just to make fun of them. Every time you're doing something on Instagram, every time you're looking at something on TikTok, it's being processed by the hyperscalers. In addition to the hyperscalers, you then have the co-location companies or the real estate investment trusts, which are focused on data centers. These are names which are not as well known to many people, but they will sometimes go out and develop a data center on behalf of one of the hyperscalers, or they're the ones that lease out space to companies, to governmental entities. The state of Virginia, the city of Chesapeake probably uses a co-location company, and that's where their data is stored. So they will go out and develop large facilities, maybe not as large as some of the hyperscalers, but they will go out and develop these facilities and then lease out parts of the facility to multiple companies, or lease out the entire one to one of the larger companies to undertake their activities. You then will see a third category of developers, and these are the land developers. These are the companies, and these are two of the leading ones, Tract and Cloverleaf, that go out and buy property years in advance, get it entitled, get the utilities extended to the facility or to the site, so that when the co-location companies or the hyperscalers need that space in the future, they have the sites ready to go. You also have a lot of real estate speculators that are engaged in this as well because they see the opportunity for a quick buck. I will not go into the fourth category of data center developers, and that is the cryptocurrency people. That is a category of developers that you will see out there. They are to be looked at. It's obviously an important activity, but they're ones to be looked at with some suspicion. Only because they are very price sensitive, and they are not going to have a lot of the economic benefit of data centers that I'm going to talk about later in this presentation. So why do people hate data centers then if they're so absolutely essential to the functioning of a modern society? And the reason they hate it is because they think this is what all data centers are. This is an actual data center in Data Center Alley in Northern Virginia, which of course is the greatest concentration of data centers in the world. This is in Chantilly. And you see this data center in the background. This is on a snowy night because you can see the snow in the paved parking lot there behind the mullet houses of Loudoun County, Virginia. Why do we call them mullet houses? Because they're brick up front and the porch is in the back. So again, party, all business up front and party in the back. And if you were having your party on the back and you had to listen to the noise and see the lights and see the security all day long right next to your house, you'd be upset too. And this is somewhat a creature of how data centers developed in Northern Virginia. Land in Northern Virginia for data centers is now going for $4 million an acre. And so data centers are crammed onto 10 to 15 acres. And unfortunately, Loudoun County and others made some mistakes along the way. After Al Gore invented the internet in the late 90s, you really had the development of the data center industry in Northern Virginia because you had a node of the internet that was located in Northern Virginia known as May East. And they and UUNet and Verizon started to build out the backbone of the internet around May East. And Loudoun County allowed, at the time, data centers as by right uses in Northern Virginia and in Loudoun County. And you didn't have, of course, large tracts of land, hundreds of acres of land near Dulles Airport, so data centers would cram in on 10 acres. And then Loudoun County allowed residential and commercial and school uses right up against data centers. While you will certainly find examples of these in Northern Virginia and some other settings, this is not the face of modern data centers. And some of the issues that are associated with this are being mitigated as data centers are developing across the country. But I'll return to that later. What are some of the essential elements for data center operations? First and foremost is power. Think about your phone when you charge it. It gets hot. Think about your computer after it's been used for a while. It gets hot. The reason it gets hot is because electricity is, of course, running the chips, and when chips run, the electricity, the power creates heat. And data centers require a lot of power not only to run the chips, but then to cool them off, because if they get too hot, they don't perform well. And that's why you have, again, a large electrical demand for these data centers. So you also are looking at not only the amount of power that's necessary to run a data center, but also the type of power. And many of the hyperscalers that I talked about earlier have strong commitments to doing renewable energy, although that's not necessarily always the case. Water and wastewater are absolutely essential elements with regards to data centers, and most of that relates to the cooling aspect of the data centers. And I know we'll hear later from HRSD and others about, and the construction folks about those aspects. Fiber is absolutely essential because the data doesn't just magically appear in your home. It has to be connected to you. And so data has to move by fiber. And then you're going to hear about generators because these facilities need to be able to run 100% of the time, 24/7, 365. And so generators are there to provide backup power in case the grid goes down. And all of those elements are impacted by the type of data center and the type of the user that is in there. So let's break down some of those issues and why people are concerned about data centers. The first issue that comes with data centers is the concern regarding electricity prices. And the data on that is somewhat inconclusive. This was actually from the Washington Post that looked at the change in electricity prices over the last 5 years. And you actually look at where electricity prices are rising, it's not in Virginia, at least on the wholesale level of power. It is rising in states that have significant environmental and regulatory costs imposed on electricity, Maine, New York, California being among those. But you cannot deny, we all know that our power bills are going up. Why are power bills going up? Because we haven't invested in our grid infrastructure in decades in this country, and we'll hear about that certainly from the Dominion team later. So generation costs are actually going down, but the transmission and distribution costs are going up because we've underinvested in our infrastructure to get the power to you. And guess what? The cost of those inputs are going up. Copper, aluminum, steel, nickel, everything that is used in the transmission and distribution facility, the cost is going up, just like it is being reflected in the products you buy every day. And a lot of the costs for electricity are being driven by those costs and not necessarily the increased demand coming from large industrial users. Generators, the concern regarding generators is, yes, they can be noisy and they create emissions. Fortunately, those emissions are regulated by the State Department of Environmental Quality, which does a very good job of enforcing that. And some of the noise and the issues that can come from data center generators can be dealt with by putting them in these kind of hush houses and other activities. People complain about the water and the concern regarding the water that is used by data centers. Well, let's put that in perspective, folks. Yes, data centers use a lot of water, but when you compare it to a lot of the other activities in this country, agriculture uses 118 billion gallons a day of water, and eating's pretty important. Beef, I love a good hamburger, but beef production in this country takes 21 trillion gallons of water to produce. Golf courses take 547 billion gallons of water a year. The average golf course in this part of the country is going to take 20 million gallons a year of water to irrigate, whereas a closed-loop data center will use maybe 750,000 gallons a year. So the difference is pretty significant. Data centers, as you see, use 17 billion gallons of water a year. And of course, data centers have every incentive to reduce the amount of water that they're using. And soft drink production uses about 12 billion gallons a year. So yes, they do consume a lot of water, but when you put it in relative comparison to a lot of other uses of water, it's relatively small. I've talked about the types of cooling systems. You have an open loop system versus a closed loop system, and this will impact the amount of water that is used by a data center. An open loop system, you'll hear more about this later, but you have a trade-off. Do you want to use less water and more electricity for cooling things down, or more water and less electricity? And that's the decision that you have to make when you're looking at dealing with some of the issues to mitigate the heat that is generated by data centers, and there are choices that are out there. Data centers, a lot of people criticize them for not creating a lot of jobs. And it's true, relative to their square footage, they don't create a lot of jobs. You have 50 to 100 jobs per 250,000 square feet of jobs created by a data center. Now, large hyperscale facilities may have a lower ratio than that because you just get some efficiencies there that come with it. But data centers do create hundreds of jobs during construction. Vince will probably tell a story about QTS, which is located near the Richmond Airport. They're going to be developing for the next 15 years. There are 5,000 people every day showing up on that site, working on projects for 15 years. So you not only have the jobs that come when it's actually operating, but also the construction jobs that come with it. The vast majority of them are high school graduates, or they have a certification or credential from a community college. They do not require a 4-year education. So those are good jobs at good wages without the debt that sometimes comes with a 4-year degree. And that job benefit does not include the indirect and induced benefits that come from data centers. The types of jobs that you find in data centers are not just security positions, but you also have a lot of people who have to take care of all those wires and servers and beeping and blinking things that I showed earlier. So you have, and again, what you're seeing is Virginia's community colleges, not only here in Hampton Roads, but you're seeing it certainly in Mecklenburg County. Alex will talk about that later, and other programs that the Virginia Community College System has put into place and in cooperation with career and technical education programs at the high school level to create the credentials and certifications that are necessary to work in data centers. You also will see Brookings Institution came out with this analysis a couple of weeks ago, actually, that talked about some of the other jobs, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit hard to read. But it says that when a community has a data center, that kind of the halo effect that comes from that creates additional jobs in the economy that are not directly tied to the data center. So you see not only does employment generally go up in a community, but you see significant growth in professional services, information technology, and other aspects because you have a data center in your community. What's happening, though, our data centers are now becoming one of the most divisive issues in American political discourse. This year in 2026, unlike us in Virginia, we do all-cycle elections. In the rest of the country, most state legislatures and governors are up for election this year. I think 36 states have governors, and data centers and the costs associated or attributed to data centers are probably one of the biggest issues facing politicians across the country. This is the Washington Post analysis talking about concerns about data centers in Oklahoma with this man having his sign that says Jesus was born on ag land. Last time I read Luke, Jesus was born in the little town of Bethlehem, but the issues that are wrapped up with data centers are some of the concerns that I talked about earlier. Now, unfortunately, like everything in our society here in 2026, it becomes intensely political. And so when you ask people what they think about data centers, Politico did this poll recently. They first asked, well, what do you think about data centers? And they broke it down politically. So they asked people who voted for Harris and then for Trump in 2024, what do you think about data centers? Harris voters were 49% said they support data centers. Trump voters said 61% said they support data centers. But then you ask the question of those same voters, well, if you knew that the data centers were backed by Trump and are advancing AI, the support among Harris voters drops to 28%. And the support among Trump voters even drops by 7%. And that's not to say that there's an issue with the politics of this, of the policy here. It's just that it has become intensely political. And when you put the combination of Trump and AI together, that's a poison for just about any issue, but particularly for data centers. You then look at the polling. Let's dive down and look at the polling in Virginia and see how the polling has changed over time in Virginia. The Washington Post and the Schar School at George Mason did this study back in March. And they've been doing this study and asking people around Virginia what their views are on data centers for a number of years. And in 2023, the support level for data centers, and particularly for state incentives for data centers, was at 61%. Now, when they ask the question in 26, the support has flipped completely. And people are opposed to that. The Washington Post then said, well, what do you think about data centers, and what positive and negative impacts do you see from data centers? And even in 2026, when you still had people widely opposed to data centers, most people do believe that they provide, at least a plurality believes that they do provide money for county governments, and I know Alex will talk about that later. A plurality believes that they are good for the local economy. But where data centers are particularly vulnerable is on their impact on the local government, as people do feel that they are bad for the local environment. I was at a data center meeting in South Carolina a couple of weeks ago, and one of the questioners asked me, is it true that data centers kill all animals and plants within a 4-mile radius? Because that's what people believe. I had people yelling at me before I got the police escort out of the building for my own personal safety, and I'm not making that up. I had people yelling at me that I was there to kill their kids with cancer. And people believe that the data centers are bad for the environment. People, interestingly, also believe that they cause local property tax rates to go up. And I know Alex will talk about the experience in Mecklenburg County, how that's certainly not the case. My own home county of Henrico County, we've had our property tax rate reduced from 87 to 83 cents a hundred. Where I actually grew up in Louisa County, Virginia, we're dropping the car tax rate in Louisa County and maybe on the path to eliminate the car tax because of data center growth. So the facts don't bear that out. People do believe that they do increase your utility bills, but people do at least still believe that they are good at creating jobs. Another poll was done in January by the Wason Center at Christopher Newport, which asked people what they thought with regards to legislation and what should be done by the Virginia General Assembly regarding data centers. And when you see, which I'll run through at the end, the legislation that did pass the General Assembly, and I think they actually did a good job as legislators in sorting through what was appropriate to be done and some of the hysteria that was driving some of the other bills. You'll see this polling that people did not want data centers within a mile of a national park, state park, or a historically significant site. Heck, we're Virginia, you're within a mile of any of those at any one time. People were concerned regarding, they wanted them to be required, their energy to come from renewable or nuclear sources. They wanted site assessments and review of noise. And again, you'll see the bills that were passed by the General Assembly largely stuck to what public opinion was. Unfortunately, what you've got is a number of groups that are out there that are mobilizing around data center growth, whether it's the Piedmont Environmental Council, other organizations that support clean energy have decided that data centers are a challenge and are bringing a lot of opposition around it. You've got environmental justice groups opposing it. You've got the other union groups. But interestingly, what you're seeing is the Virginia Education Association has come out opposed to data centers, particularly with regards to the sales and use tax exemption for data centers. But you're seeing a split within the union movement, which is very interesting. In that you've got the service unions, the teachers unions, and all saying they're opposed to data centers, particularly the sales use tax exemption. But this was a number of the electrical workers, steam fitters, and others. This is with them, with Speaker Scott during the most recent General Assembly session, and they're supporting data center growth. So you've got this very interesting split within the labor union movement with regards to those who pro-trades are pro-energy and pro-data centers, and those that are more the service side are opposed to it, or certainly opposed to the sales tax exemption and incentives for data centers. You've also got some very interesting political opposition in play here. This is many of you who watch Shark Tank. You're certainly familiar with Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, who's developing a data center in Utah. And he did a lot of recent work on this group called the Alliance for a Better Utah, which has come out in opposition to data centers. And through a lot of digging, they found that through a series of shell corporations that a lot of this was backed by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, that is not to say, and I want to be absolutely definitively clear right now, that is not to say that data center oppositions are backed by the Chinese Communist Party. There are many people that are well-meaning, well-intentioned, asking good, hard questions, as you should, regarding any development in a community. But there are forces that are out there that are putting information up regarding data centers that is not true. They're putting it up regarding other projects. People just don't want development anywhere. I did a big project in South Dakota a few months ago, large project, $2 billion investment of 3,000 jobs for a community. I walked up to the mayor afterwards just to see how he was feeling. I said, you know, I must be feeling this is a really great day. He said, yeah, I was until I looked at my phone. And someone had texted him and said, I'm coming to your house and I'm going to kill you this afternoon because of this project. And this was not a data center project. This is a food and beverage project. And so understand that some of the information that people are putting up on social media, interestingly, regarding anti-development is being driven by forces that are not our friends. The American Energy Institute did this study that came out in April that talked about some of the money that's coming out of Europe that is supporting some of these initiatives. Again, you should always ask questions about where information is coming from. Again, I want to be crystal clear. There are many people that oppose development and oppose data centers for very valid reasons and concerns that they have, a lot of times because they have gaps in information. But we do have very interesting forces at play, particularly around data centers, that are causing a lot of the misinformation out there. So how is data center revenue being used in Virginia? I talked about the point that people think that they're actually raising taxes in Virginia at the local level. They are not. Loudoun County has reduced its property tax rate from, I think it was $1.15 a hundred to 80 cents a hundred. Loudoun County gets nearly $1 billion a year right now from data centers that's using significant school construction. Henrico County, where I live, has set up a $60 million affordable housing fund based on the data center revenue that they get. Mecklenburg County, Alex will talk about that later, now has the lowest property tax rate in the state. Think about if we had a 38 cents per 100 tax rate here in the city of Chesapeake. Wouldn't that be great? In other words, your rate would be a third of what it is now. And that's not to say Chesapeake necessarily has high rates, but you compare it to 38 cents a 100, and Alex will talk about how they've been able to rebuild their whole school system. Prince William County gets $280 million a year, which has been able to enable them to lower their real and personal property tax, and then I already talked about Louisa County earlier. The General Assembly, as I noted, did pass some bills regarding data centers this year. There were over 100 bills. It was probably the most active policy area in the General Assembly this year, and only a few did pass. And you'll see the bills that they did pass this year, as I noted earlier, very much aligned with the concerns that are identified in that Christopher Newport Waste Center poll, where people said they wanted to see restrictions around the cost shifting regarding energy imports, that not all residential consumers that bear that those that are resulting or causing the imports of power. Because remember, Virginia, we are the largest net importer of power in the country. We don't generate all our own power in Virginia, so we have to import it from West Virginia and Pennsylvania, and we have to import it on those hot days. And that costs a lot of money because there's essentially an auction for power. So the General Assembly has passed legislation to put some curbs around that. They're requiring data centers to disclose to the Department of Environmental Quality the amount of water that they're consuming. That's a good transparency initiative, folks. There's an expansion of a pilot program, particularly in Northern Virginia, to allow for the undergrounding of power lines. That's very expensive, but the people of Northern Virginia did want to see that pilot program expanded. There's legislation to require a site assessment of data center sites, looking at the water parks and historical impacts of them. That's good government, folks. I commend the General Assembly for doing stuff that is good. They're saying that the Department of Environmental Quality has to require data centers to be the top of the line, which would be tier 4, which have the lowest emissions and the least noise. And they've asked the Department of Environmental Quality to look at the waste heat from data centers and what can that be used for. There's been a series of studies about how to use those for agricultural and greenhouse purposes. The General Assembly is also now, as many of you are aware, is looking at the issue with regards to the data center sales and use tax exemption. That was passed in Virginia back in 2010, and now most states, with a few exceptions, and those few exceptions being states like California, or states that don't have a sales and use tax exemption, have a sales and use tax exemption to encourage data centers to come to their states. The current sales tax exemption was set to expire in 2035 in Virginia. The cost of that, meaning the lost revenue that we have, is over $1 billion a year, but the economic benefits of that are over $8 billion a year. We had a number of bills that would have initiated either a full repeal or limited it in Northern Virginia, or putting sustainability practices around it. And we were going down these various paths until the Senate proposed that they want to repeal the sales and use tax exemption immediately, or essentially January 1, 2027, with no grandfathering provision. So you've had nearly $80 billion of investment in Virginia in the last year in data centers, with people thinking they're going to get their sales and use tax exemption through 2035, and we're going to cut it off. That's playing Russian roulette with the Virginia economy, folks. And my biggest concern is that Virginia's never been a state with a lot of incentives. We just haven't been. We've always been a state where we live up to our word. And if we start to break our word in Virginia, whether it's data centers, whether it's other projects, that is bad for Virginia, its economic development. So quickly running through as a closeout here, what are the potential benefits of a data center? First, it's the low community impacts. They don't create a lot of traffic. They don't create a lot of strain on the schools. They don't create a lot of additional housing needs. They occupy very little land with regards to their value. They allow for the spreading of some of the costs associated with water and wastewater and utility infrastructure among multiple customers. And enhance reliability and resiliency of that. They obviously create high-paying jobs, as we talked about. They do create a lot of significant property tax revenue. And there is the opportunity, and you're seeing it across Virginia, of attracting the suppliers to the data center industry that come in and cluster near these. But what are some of the issues that we in Chesapeake need to have as part of a community conversation about this? And that is, would you rather the land that could be used for data centers, would you rather it be reserved for manufacturing uses, retail uses, other commercial uses? That's a valid community conversation to have. People ask, well, what happens when all these data centers close in 20 years? What are we gonna do with it? You should always have a redevelopment plan. Look at what's going on with Greenbrier right now. Look at what's going on with other projects around this city and around this state. You should always have a redevelopment plan. So you need to be thinking about what's next. So as you think about data centers, and I'm not saying data centers are going away, but as the industry evolves and changes, you need to be thinking about, well, what happens next? And think about what that means from an infrastructure perspective. You need to be thinking about whether the community is going to use local incentives to attract data centers. You need to be thinking about how you're going to spend the revenue. Is it going to be dedicated towards schools or affordable housing or parks and recreation? Are you going to do just one data center, or are you going to become a cluster of data centers? How do you align data centers with the workforce training programs of the community college system and the career and technical education system? Make sure that the data center revenue you have coming in goes to one-time projects, because the revenue can be very volatile based on assessment cycles at a community. You also need to be thinking about what policies and procedures you put in place. Do you want it by right, or do you want to make sure that the community and the governing body gets a bite at the apple every time, and dealing with issues regarding noise and setbacks? What about your ability to permit these projects, and then where is the construction workforce going to be housed if it comes here? So again, just wanted to lay the table on a number of issues that will be discussed later today, and appreciate all that you're doing to learn more about this and get involved in your community. Thank you very much.
So we're going to bring up our first panel today. We've got a number of great folks. If you all want to go ahead and come on up. We've got Vince Barnett from VEDP, Jake Wiseman from Dominion Energy, and Amos Jenkins from Digital Realty. While they're coming up, my name is Barrett Stork. I have the pleasure of chairing the data center and broadband work group for the Chesapeake Alliance. It has been fantastic to get to work with this amazing team to pull together this event. And we do hope that you find some great information here from all of our speakers and panelists. What we're going to do, just to give everybody a preview, we're going to ask our speakers to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about one or two topics that we've asked them to kind of deep dive on. We're going to go through each one, and then we're going to try and get to some questions towards the end. I've been looking at the questions you all have been submitting online. Thank you. That's going to definitely help me out as I'm moving forward with some of this Q&A. And again, what we don't get to, we're going to try and make sure we've got up on our website for folks to take a look at afterwards. With that, click to the next slide. Do you want to go ahead and ask Vince to kick us off? Maybe, possibly. There we go. Vince, if you want to jump in here, give us a little overview.
Absolutely. Good morning. I tell you, it's always very difficult to follow Chris Lloyd. He's an amazing advocate for economic development largely in Virginia, and his expertise around data centers has been tremendous. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to share a stage with you. I'm Vince Barnett with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. So we, VEDP, is how you will hear me refer to ourselves. We are the state lead for economic development. We do a wide variety of work to grow and diversify the economy. We target everything from aerospace to life sciences to data centers. And in my role, I lead the data center initiatives. So I get asked a lot, well, what does that mean exactly? And it really, it varies. This industry is a snowflake industry, is how I like to describe it. No two projects are the same. No two communities are the same in how they want to consider data centers if they want to consider data centers. So a lot of what we do in this particular space is to try to align and marry communities that have expressed an interest and have solutions, real estate solutions that might work. And many times we are the initial contact by potential clients that are looking for sites, and we can point them in the right direction. A lot of my role also is to help communities better understand through forums such as this and one-on-one what data center development really looks like and could look like within their communities, particularly as we see this push downstate. So Chris in his slides talked a lot about Data Center Alley. Virginia has more experience with data centers than anyone in the world by multiples. Our utility partners, such as Dominion and others, have more experience energizing data centers than anywhere else in the world. But we have seen a market saturation in Northern Virginia, and folks are starting to come downstate. And a lot of these communities have no experience with data centers and are asking great questions to understand if they may be a good fit for their community or if not. So a lot of our role is to help those communities to understand if this is something that would be attractable to them. So we are excited about the opportunity. We still continue to see a robust pipeline across the state. They're looking at every region of the state right now, they being data centers. And Virginia is a good opportunity for folks that are interested in doing intentional development.
Oh, thank you, Vince. All right, we're going to shift over to Jake from Dominion to give us a little overview.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Jake Wiseman. I'm with Dominion Energy, and I'm a part of our data center practice team. Northern Virginia has been heavily talked about this morning specifically, but I did just want to take a minute to highlight that a little bit more. One more visual on that is that, yes, we are the most largest data center market in the United States, and it is the the 5 next largest markets combined is still smaller than Northern Virginia in just itself. It's been said a few times too that Northern Virginia specifically, but Virginia is the home to the #1 data center market in the world. Since 2019, we have connected over 100 data centers with a capacity of just over 8 gigawatts. Last year, we saw a peak demand of 4.3 gigawatts. And in 2025, we saw our entire sales 27% for Dominion Energy come from data centers. And then we saw a new increase of 400 megawatts specifically from data centers just last year. So typically how we deal with a formalized data center request that comes to our territory is through a 3-contract structure. The first piece would be through an engineering letter of authorization, or an ELOA as we call it. This kind of just goes through the preliminary conceptual engineering for the project, where the customer will have financial obligations to pay for towards Dominion. Next would be a construction letter of authorization, where they will basically pay for any deposits for any equipment that needs to be purchased so that the ratepayers are not paying for that themselves. And then finally, it comes with an electric service agreement, the ESA. This typically comes out about 12 months prior to their service being energized, and this is a more eloquent version of their monthly bill. So one hot topic that I'm sure we'll get to later that has been heavily questioned here is our new GS5 rate that's coming out in January of next year. The biggest thing with this would be having minimums built in and higher minimums for data center customers. This is our high load package for any customers over 25 megawatts on one contiguous piece of land. So within their bill, they have an 85% minimum for transmission and distribution, 60% for generation. And basically what that means is if they're requesting a certain number for their power, even if they're not using it, they'll be paying the minimums for what they told us to build for. The next thing would be longer contracts. They're going to be going into a 14-year contract for any new customers starting next year. And then larger deposits for any equipment needs to be done for their substations, any infrastructure upgrades. That's really all I have.
Thank you, Jake. We're going to shift it over to our data center provider here, Digital Realty. Amos, you want to give us an overview?
Hello, my name's Amos Jenkins. I work for Digital Realty. We're one of the largest data center builders and operators in the world. We have a large presence in Virginia. I believe most of our presence is in Virginia, but we're everywhere in every continent. So can keep going here. We'll talk a little bit about why we need data centers, why they're important. I know Chris already went over that pretty well in depth, so I'll kind of move through this a little bit quickly. But everything we do in our digital world goes through a data center, and it's pushing more and more that way. And I believe it's the more efficient way to do it, rather than to have small office data centers that may be less reliable, dispersed out through office buildings with less efficient cooling. Okay, and yeah, so in Northern Virginia, we have produced a lot of jobs. We generally have in the U.S. over 100 open positions through churn, um, and new facilities coming online. A lot of that's happening in Virginia, Loudoun, and Prince William particularly. So what we did want to highlight here is there's a lot of talk around water in the industry, and what we've done is updated our design to not use water at all. Basically, we'll fill our system with the closed loop, and when that system is full, that's it. No more water usage at the site. And of course, we have many other sustainable methods as shown here.
Middle button again.
Also, what I am proud of with Digital Realty is our partnership with the Nova Community College, creating a pipeline to get the people in the communities into the jobs at the data centers. It's not, some people think you have to be an IT professional to work in a data center. That's not true. We look for tradespeople, we look for mechanics, electricians, HVAC technicians, and also building engineers. And that's what the program is to train the communities to be data center engineers.
Fantastic. All right, great. Thank you, Amos. Appreciate that. So we're going to try to get through a few questions here, a little bit of a rapid fire scenario. When you're working with data center developers and companies, and they're looking for an area that they want to develop in, what would make Hampton Roads unique? I know we've done a lot with our broadband companies like Cox Communications and others to push fiber all across the region. We've got Global Links that has put in the transatlantic fiber landing station in Virginia Beach. Does that help us be more attractive?
The short answer is absolutely it does. I want to back up just a little bit and kind of talk what I would see from the state level in terms of how we may be approached by a developer. So today, it's terrific to have Jake here in Dominion. In the data center space right now, it's all about power. They are chasing electrons to run all the servers that support your average 16 devices that Chris said. We'll say there's some new stats that suggest that number from Consumer Reports is now 21 devices. So I really want to emphasize, Chris had the mirror up there to say, what's driving all of this? Well, it's you and I, it's all of us. It's my son and I in our home. Right now, we have 19 devices that are connected, and people don't necessarily recall that, but it's refrigerators, ovens, Ring doorbells, your thermostats. It goes on and on. All of that is being processed and disseminated through data centers. So when developers come to us right now, they're typically coming to us and saying, hey, where is there power availability in a community that has expressed interest in data centers? So we have the ability to say, we've got communities that are interested. The reality is there's not just power sitting around on the shelf for someone to come and grab. So things like the transatlantic cables and doing your due diligence on the front end and working to identify sites that can get a path to power as quickly as possible, working with folks like Jake to understand upfront, what do you have today, what ultimately can you get, and what would that look like, helps to align those initial inquiries that we get at the state level to say, hey, point me in the right direction. We have this type of growth need, and we're looking to find a path to get there. The industry today, it is about mitigating risk and speed to market. They want to be online as quickly as possible. And in some instances, from a power story, it could be years, and it could be 5 years. I've had to tell clients as much as 10 years based on that particular scenario. So there are bridge and power solutions and those kinds of things. So in short, you all benefit here in Hampton Roads and in Chesapeake. One, you've got a very robust business community. You've got a favorable business climate. All the traditional site selection factors that folks need. You have to have a good workforce. All those things are there. And then you start to stack the data center specific assets over top of that, starting with power, fiber, water. Water may be a challenge. I just want to reemphasize what Chris said in his slide and what Amos just said here. There are abilities for data centers to use less water through closed loop systems and other technologies that are out there, but there's a trade-off. And if you are a water-rich community, data centers would like to use more water. They use more water, they can divert more electrons to the servers and get more compute out of a particular facility. But if there's not water and it is mandated that there's a closed water system requirement, they can know that at the front and build to those specs and move on. So in short, there's a lot of moving parts to all of this, but your community could be well positioned, but you're gonna have to understand your power and your infrastructure, and then understand intentionally how the development can work within your community, understanding your assets, and then make sure us at the state level and other folks that are marketing these sites are aware of your interest, and we could work.
Awesome, thank you. Let's stay on power for a minute. Jacob, maybe you could talk a little bit about future demand planning. I know you touched on this a little bit, but talk about how Dominion looks at that. I mean, this is a massive amount of power that's being asked for Dominion to provide. How do we make sure that that's even available?
That is a massive amount of power. We have had such an unprecedented amount of load requests in the last couple of years, that so much that it's just over 70 gigawatts in new requests. So something that we've had to do as a company, both Dominion distribution, generation, and transmission, is come up with this queue process so that essentially we're not promising power to these customers that we can't actually support. And so ultimately, our transmission organization has this queue process in place where projects are going to be vetted over an annual review each year. And if the generation that comes online is not able to support those projects, then those projects would not be served at that time. So it's more of a reliability kind of checkpoint. Nobody's going to be served if that power is not available. But yes, there's definitely an unprecedented load request coming through here.
Fantastic.
Could
I
add one piece to this? I think it's hard to understand what a gigawatt of power means, and it's 70 gigawatt. Let me assure you, it's a lot. We're talking the amount of power to run a city. Given some of the challenges, one thing that we get asked a lot about is it's really important, the hyperscalers and kind of the tier one developers that were on Chris's slide, ultimately they want grid connectivity. So they demand to work with the Dominion or their counterparts. But what we are seeing in this interim, as there is this queue and wait for power to come online, is the concept of on-site generation or a bridging technology. You may hear that, a behind-the-meter solution. So there are folks that are actively considering how can they get, again, speed to market, how can they get their facilities up quicker utilizes some kind of temporary on-site generation. Mind you, temporary could be years here, depending on the capacity need. So that is something else that your community should consider if you would be interested in having, if you got gas assets, gas pipelines, those types of things, folks are considering combined cycle plants. It's not what the data center industry has their expertise at, but again, because of the capacity demands are so high, they're looking at all means possible to be able to get the facilities up online. But at the end of the day, they are going to want the grid connectivity for the reliability standards and the expertise that Dominion's deliver. And I think it's important to know that.
Thanks, Vince. Amos, I know we touched on closed loop systems. That is a term and a trend that seems to be coming out more and more lately. Can you give us a little more detail about kind of how that works? I mean, is this an air conditioning unit that, like a refrigerator? Can you help us understand how a closed loop system actually works?
Yeah, so Digital Realty actually, until recently, didn't even have closed loop system. We use refrigerant only for the most part. So we would just like your house, you would have indoor units and outdoor units. The indoor units would collect the heat, and the outdoor unit would expel it. Now, here recently, we've had more and more customers demanding water to the computer chip. And in that situation, you must have water in the building. So we looked at, the best repeatable, lowest impact design, and that is a closed loop system. So once again, you fill the system full of water one time, and you treat the water. It's contained, and it will flow through the data centers, through the chips, if that infrastructure is required there, and onto generally the roof where we have air-cooled chillers. So they'll act as like I was just mentioning, an indoor-outdoor unit all in one package on the roof, and the water will be cooled by passing through those units.
Gotcha. Water and chips, that doesn't sound like it should go together.
It's where we are today.
Well, you talked about trying to make sure that you've got them so that you can rebuild these in different areas. How often are you building new data centers? Is this?
As quickly as the market will allow, as quickly as Dominion can provide us the power, and our customers are demanding more and more. So we have to keep up with, build the infrastructure for them to do their business and to support the communities.
Gotcha. And we got a question from the audience that was about the source of the water that you might be using for a closed loop system. Can you talk a little bit about where you all are pulling from to make that happen, and maybe different ways you do that?
Oh, sure. So for the closed loop system, it's we want clean water. We don't, but once again, it's a very small amount. We're filling pipes. We would be using less water than like a typical hotel, but only once, just to fill the system, treat it. So you would get it from, the local municipalities.
Do you use wells ever, well water? Is that would that not be clean water?
Well, so in the past, far in the past, maybe 20 years ago, we depended on water for cooling primarily. It's an effective, efficient way to do it. And in those days, it was also a concern of reliability. Like if you are using water for cooling and you lose the water supply, you're down. You can't support your customers. So in those times, we did drill wells for backup redundancy, but it was all to maintain that redundancy, not something you would use, more like a fallback.
Gotcha, but that's the old way of doing it. That's not what you're doing.
That's the old way. So today, once again, we're using zero water. We're filling the system, and that's it. It's closed, and no more water.
Gotcha.
And I'd like to add a couple of things here, because this is something that we get asked about a lot here. And for the projects that I am working, they tend to come to us once we understand that there is a power opportunity. They will outline the kind of water that they need. So they're going to choose a site that can support their water needs. And again, their preference in many instances, if you have water, they're going to want water because, again, they can divert more of the electricity to computing. But if you mandate a closed loop system, they understand that from the beginning, they can work with that. But the vast majority of the water is being provided from the municipality. So if you understand, and in many of these instances, certainly as we looked at these more rural opportunities that are coming downstate, there are old manufacturing, there are water systems that were developed to support textile plants or whatever it may be that have these tremendous capacities. So a data center actually helps to offset cost because the infrastructure is there being maintained for some potential use. So in many instances, having a large water user is a relief to a community. That being said, we talked about the size of Virginia's market. We are the largest by far. And if you haven't looked, this report is a little bit dated now, but Virginia's General Assembly published a report through its JLARC, the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission, back in December of 24. They took about a year to study to help the General Assembly get prepared for some of the legislation that Chris mentioned. That report found that in Virginia, the largest data center market of the world, that 83% of the data centers across Virginia use no more water than a large office building, re-emphasizing what Amos just said there. 83% use no more. So there are some big users. I think Chris's slide was amazing. 17 billion gallons versus 500 and some odd billion gallons for golf courses. So again, they have the ability to adjust based on what your community can support.
Thank you, Vince. So one of the issues I know we've run into in this area is not just once we get the power lines up and once everything is running, but restoration. If something does happen, if we have a major storm, a major incident that occurs. Jake, could you talk a little bit about how Dominion looks at data centers and transmission lines and how we look at making sure that we're restoring that for the entire community?
Yeah, sure. So if there is a need for a restoration effort, typically Dominion would do kind of an analysis and see where most of the damage is. Once our crews are able to work safely, and they would get out there and assess the kind of those clusters where they can get the most people online at once. So think of your areas that would target hospitals, your public needs, right? And from there kind of work their way from the substations out. So you're not gonna typically see somebody going to try to get a data center online first. It would be more or less going for the critical needs and being around those hubs where you can get the most customers back online at once. Another note that I'd just like to mention that when we have these requests for new data centers, we have them have their own backup generation, whether that be generators, they're providing their own solar, whatever their request is, but they do need to have their own backup utility use.
Let's stay on that for 1 second. I got a question from the audience about those generators. Is there a way for those generators to be kicked online when there's a major strain on the network? Not just when it goes down, but if there's a major issue and you just can call them up and say, hey, can you turn on your generators and get off of our grid for a while?
Sure, there will be times where we have planned outages and we would contact the data center users to let them know that we would be taking outages at the substation, and for them to remain active, they would need to rely on their own backup source.
I can speak a little bit to that too, because there is a event response program that Digital Realty is involved in. So if there is a strain on the grid due to a storm or high demand conditions, they'll call on us and we'll actively transfer to a generator on select sites that are set up to do this. And it'll be sort of like a virtual power plant to take the load off the grid. So we do that also.
So you may hear this referred to, it's called demand response. So one thing that is important, again, and from my mindset with this and my approach of helping communities understand, it's critically important that you educate your community on what something like that could be. Because generators are typically for backup uses. There's not a power outage, and then you see generators coming online. There's been times when folks have said, hey, what's going on? They're calling their boards of supervisors or whoever it may be to say these generators are running, there's no power outage. Well, they're helping to support the network at the time on these high use days. So it's really, as you overlay all of the things that can go into a data center development, demand response is something that is used, but it's important that you help educate folks on that.
Vince, let me stay on you for a second. Chris talked a little about having redevelopment plans. Is that something that VEDP works with localities on? Are there recommendations? Are there best practices that you've seen for what localities can do to make sure they're planning far ahead?
Absolutely, I would think that that's part of a a robust and comprehensive economic development plan as a whole. So, here in Hampton Roads and in Chesapeake specifically, you are blessed with having very professional and experienced economic developers, so I would not have concerns. Before I speak to the redevelopment of data centers, a couple of things, as I get asked this a lot about this potential of an AI bubble or data center bubble. And as Chris said, none of us can tell the future, but the reality is right now that these folks, there's real revenue being made. Microsoft, Google, AWS, these are billions upon billions of dollars worth of back order capacity needs to support the ongoing infrastructure here. So my good friend, Anthony Romanello in Henrico County often says this, if you as an economic developer were presented an opportunity to have a project that was gonna be picket with construction and everything, let's say 1,000 jobs over 20 years with the revenue and such that would come with that project on day one, would you take that, recognizing that 20 years later it would be gone? Most of us as economic developers would say yes. We would love to have that type of project that would be here for that time. That said, understanding always being into data trends and what's happened is part of an economic development program to understand. So the redevelopment, I think likely what will happen more so from a redevelopment component is technology enhancements in this industry happening every day to find a way to be more energy efficient. It wasn't that long ago, just from a proximity standpoint, you needed to be closer to Ashburn than away from it, and that's all changed now. I think the redevelopment could be that they've got more improved technologies within the industry themselves, and they're redeveloping, the data centers themselves are redeveloping with those new technologies as facilities get dated. But it is critically important. I think that runs through your economic development program and your community leaders to stay on top of trends and understand as these things progress where opportunities may lie.
Thank you, Vince. I got a question from the audience about small modular reactors. It's been talked about quite a bit here, or not here, but talked about quite a bit in Virginia. Wondering, I would just open it up to any of the panelists here. Any thoughts on using SMRs as potential power sources, direct power sources maybe for data centers? Is that something viable, or is that even within the future time frame?
I would say first that this is not directly in my wheelhouse, but just because it is a source of power, Dominion itself is looking at just a majority of different ways that we can generate power. I know it's something that's being talked about just system-wide. I haven't seen anything where it's been data center or even customer specific, but just looking at different ways that we can generate power, it is something that at least being looked at.
Anybody else want to touch on it?
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit, and I'm going to caveat this as well. Definitely not my wheelhouse. But that said, being someone around the industry, SMRs I talked about quite a bit as a potential. So yes, I think it's reality when it becomes a commercially viable technology. Not quite there as of yet. But what I'm not so certain about, and quite frankly, I think would be highly unlikely, is I don't think you're going to have a data center with an SMR connected to it. It's difficult to site data centers today. But if you try to site a data center that's got anything with the word nuclear onto it, I just don't see how that could work. So I think the Dominions of the world, as these technologies come online, they will probably be built in some place where they can be clustered and have all the right safety precautions around it and feeding into the grid, not unlike any other power generation source. I may be wrong here, but I just don't think that the idea of data center SMR is a reality.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely not something that Digital Realty's pursuing, is becoming a power generation company. We want to stick with the data centers and let Dominion do the power generation.
Gotcha. We're just about out of time for this panel, so I did want to hit one other question, maybe open it up to all of you. Chris talked a lot about working with local governments. Wanted to get your perspectives on what can a local government do to best coordinate with you, your industry, the folks, the companies you're working with, to make sure that this is a strong, viable, long-term solution for an area if the data center is going to come in and the locality and the community want to see that happen.
First, I would just say that this is a great start for that. Just having open conversations and if it is something that your locality is looking to have, having these conversations up front, and that way you're not getting misinformation from, social media or wherever your source is, but you're getting the information straight from the folks that are gonna be doing it. And, if it's something that your area wants to do, just making sure you have those conversations early so that where if that development does come, that later down the road, there's maybe not as much friction with, any type of zoning or any of the special requirements that you might be asking for.
I think this is the most important question of the panel today. So I've got a lot to say here. I know we're tight on time, so I'm not going to say it all. But I think the key takeaways are you as community leaders in the community, you need to be intentional about how you want your development to happen, whether that's data centers or something else. So as part of this, these forums and having your folks that are providing data up to do research to really understand what it means and how it could work. Most importantly, how it could work and how it would not work within your communities. Data centers aren't right for everyone. That's the first thing to know up front. So if they are right for your community, it may be that they're right for a particular industrial park and that's it. Or maybe you've got a lot of wide open land and you're open to it being far more than that. But intentional development, targeted growth areas where you can identify the ordinance that work, closed loop systems, appropriate setbacks, noise mitigation, tick on down the list. I would recommend that you make those targeted growth areas by right for data centers with specific ordinances. So again, they are trying to mitigate risk and speed to market. So you decide what works within your community. If you're interested, you spell it out in your ordinances so the data center can read it and say, oh, I can make this work, or nope, I'm on to the next. But what that does, most importantly, it allows you to convey to your citizens and your stakeholders, we are prepared for this, we know what we want it to look like, and we're only going to allow the development that looks like this. So whether you're doing a tech overlay district or some other form of that, I think you as the community have the say of what works and what doesn't, and that's where I would spend most of my time today.
Amos, any other thoughts on that?
No, I'm just here for the technical, technical advice here on. So no, I just want the facts to be brought out and no, misinformation. So that's mainly why I'm here today.
Awesome, folks. I know you gave us a lot of questions, a lot of great questions. We're going to still try and address them maybe in some of the other panels, or for folks who are here afterwards, who can stick around and chat a little bit afterwards. But unfortunately, we've got a lot packed into this agenda, and we're going to have to shift to our next panel. So with that, please, a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, guys. And next up, we've got Lacey Shirey, who's going to moderate the next panel.
My name is Lacey Shirey. I'm here on behalf of the Chesapeake Alliance today. And I appreciate you all being here to better understand data centers. This panel with our 4 panelists here is focused on collaboration, benefits, and solutions. We know our region is interested in bringing data centers to Hampton Roads. So we are here to help inform the community and inform good policy so that this can work for our region, and we are here to make it the best it can be for our community. So joined here today, we have Mike Martin with HRSD, Alex Gottschalk with Mecklenburg County, Kyle Hart with the National Parks Conservation Association, and Michael Henley with Horgan Construction. So thank you all for joining us. Just like we did before, we're going to go through the slides and allow you all to do an introduction of yourself and your relation to data centers. So Mike, we'll start it off with you.
All right, good morning. So again, I'm Mike Martin. I'm Director of Pretreatment and Pollution Prevention for HRSD. And I'm going to talk a little bit, again, appreciate the opportunity to come and actually talk wastewater. Everybody's favorite topic, right? But it is important that water and wastewater, we've heard some from the previous panel about the importance of water and wastewater, and data centers really can't function without that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about HRSD and specifically my role and our concerns with data centers from the wastewater perspective. So for those that don't know, HRSD is the regional wastewater utility. We're not trash. We are wastewater. We have the ability to treat 225 million gallons per day combined capacity amongst 14 wastewater plants, soon to be 13. We have 8 majors getting ready to go to 7. And then we have six small plants in the Middle Peninsula and Eastern Shore. Those plants range in capacity from 25,000 gallons per day to 54 million gallons per day. So as we talk about capacity and the size of a wastewater plant and siting of where that data center may go and the need, that capacity and wastewater treatment and the treatment plant availability becomes very important. HRSD is a very innovative organization. So we have 11 active patents and 5 patents pending. So we're really looking at ways to improve technologies in wastewater treatment to help control costs. We've got a very large project underway right now called SWIFT, the Sustainable Water Initiative for Tomorrow. This is basically a water treatment project to address some of the water challenges facing Virginia and Hampton Roads. Basically, what this project does is it's an advanced water treatment plant, basically a drinking water plant at the tail end of several of our wastewater plants. And so rather than discharging the treated water into the Elizabeth, James, or York rivers, we're going to treat that water to drinking water quality and put it back into the Potomac aquifer. So what does that look like? Basically, again, treating that water through advanced treatment to drinking water quality. And by doing that, it provides regulatory stability for wastewater treatment, really around nitrogen and phosphorus discharges to the Chesapeake Bay. It reduces the rate of land subsidence, and it protects the groundwater from saltwater contamination. As the aquifer gets depleted and overused, the saltwater from the ocean starts to push in, and that could impact the quality of the water, which is important to all the needs that we've heard about. So a little bit about my role specifically. I run the pretreatment program for HRSD. This is designed at commercial and industrial dischargers. We're here to protect the infrastructure. That may be things that may clog the collection system, the pump stations, the pipes, may corrode them. Explosive conditions, we're here to control that. We're here to prevent things that may pass through the treatment plant untreated into the receiving stream or the aquifers. We're talking SWIFT. Safeguard reuse opportunities. So again, making sure that what's discharged to the wastewater plants does help the environment, is environmentally friendly, so we can reuse biosolids and protect our SWIFT water, and basically just ensure compliance with our permits on the air quality and protect public health and the environment. And this is ultimately done through a regulatory program that HRSD administers through our office. It's basically a permit program and inspection program. So we don't currently have data centers. We've learned a lot from our friends in Northern Virginia about the needs on wastewater treatment and things like that. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Mike. Alex Gottschalk with Mecklenburg County.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. For those of you who are unaware, Mecklenburg County is about 2 hours west of here on Highway 58. We are a rural county in Southern Virginia. And I would say before the data center industry came to us, we were probably most known in Hampton Roads for being one of the water suppliers for the city of Virginia Beach. And let me tell you that the amount of water that Virginia Beach pulls from our area is many, many multiples more than the data center could ever conceive of drawing down from our water supply source. So today we've talked a lot about data centers being an emerging industry, and it is so for Hampton Roads and many parts of Virginia, but it is not so for Mecklenburg. Data center industry first came to Mecklenburg when I was a student at Currituck County High School. So it's been around for a little while. As a mature industry, and that was to say I am from the Hampton Roads area, by the way. Whether you count Currituck or not, I do. And so for us now, with over 15 years of experience in the data center industry, this is the results that we've seen. Right now, the data centers consume a little over 3,000 acres in our county. And for a large rural county like Mecklenburg, that's fairly insignificant. For a large city like Chesapeake, thanks to the merger politics of the 50s and 60s, it would be fairly insignificant. And the result of that, the 0.75% of land area that have been dedicated to the data center industry thus far will produce in the upcoming assessment land book for the year that begins July 1st, 45% of our real estate valuations. So for a very small allocation of land, we are generating an enormous proportion of our revenue sources. And so that for us is a significant win, especially when there was really nobody else that was looking to us to locate and to bring that kind of economic opportunity to our area. So that's kind of the synopsis of where we're at in Mecklenburg with the data center industry. Very, very large impact for a very small amount of land given to that source. And for the buildings that are on that land, they're really not that substantial. So I would say to frame it for you all, the equivalent size of what the average data center building in Mecklenburg County looks like would be about the size of Hickory High School.
Thank you, Alex. Kyle Hart, pass it on to you. I think you've got one more slide to go. Yeah. There you go.
Slides.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kyle Hart. I work with a nonprofit called the National Parks Conservation Association, or NPCA. NPCA is a nationwide nonprofit that does national parks advocacy. I live and work in Virginia, have born and raised in Virginia, have lived here pretty much my whole life. And so I do a lot of our Virginia politics, and of course, data centers and Virginia politics kind of go hand in hand at the moment. I've been working on sort of the issue of the environmental concerns around data centers for 5.5 years now. We started working on a project on your screen here. This is the Prince William Digital Gateway, kind of a project that, quite frankly, sort of sparked a lot of this discussion in Virginia about 5 years ago. At the time, the Prince William Digital Gateway was the largest data center campus ever proposed at 2,133 acres, 25-ish million square feet of development. Directly adjacent to Manassas National Battlefield Park, which was our nexus to this work. Everything in blue is essentially national eligible battlefield, so like determined by the Department of Interior to be historically significant. And so we had significant concerns about this project and started to work on it sort of from a local land use perspective in Prince William County. And of course, over the past 5.5, 6 years, this industry has kind of only continued to grow. And so we eventually co-founded the Virginia Data Center Reform Coalition, which works to bring some statewide oversight. And a lot of the bills that Chris talked about, we supported in the General Assembly this year, and we're happy to see those get across the finish line. Our concerns, of course, are these broader cumulative impacts. A lot of the ones that have been talked about: water and sort of cumulative water quality, air quality, diesel generators, as well as new generation sources and where the additional power is coming from. Of course, loss of green space, to Mecklenburg's, 1% of land, but, we're talking statewide, 400 million square feet, 10 to 15,000 total acres, which is not an insignificant amount of land across the state of Virginia, not to mention the additional power infrastructure to serve the industry. And so that was sort of our nexus to this issue. The environmental impacts, there's like local and regional, statewide, like land use, understanding that this is an industrial land use and planning and siting projects appropriately, not near national parks. Quality of life, of course, noise, construction impacts, the lighting impacts, some of the stuff that you saw in Chris's slides, and of course, like the broader regional implications, water use and water quality, the new energy infrastructure, new power generation and power lines to serve the industry. Energy is like it's hard to escape the energy aspect. We heard from Jake, 70 gigawatts of data center demand. I want to put that into perspective. Folks in this room, I would imagine, are familiar with the big offshore wind project that Dominion Energy is currently constructing. That is a 2.6 gigawatt project. So that's like the scale. You're looking at 25 or 30 of those to meet data center energy demand alone. Like if you were just to bubble it up there. So we have sort of a list of local policy recs, a prohibition on non-disclosure agreements, or at least very, very limited use of non-disclosure agreements. We've pretty firmly believe that, if a data center says that they're not going to use a ton of water, well, let's see the numbers. That's, open conversation with Mike at HRSD and a developer to say, all right, this is how much our system can support. This is how much we need. Same thing for energy, understanding where the power is coming from, how it's getting to the site. I was telling someone earlier, there was a project in Culpeper where the Board of Supervisors approved it like 3 miles from the nearest power corridor. And then Dominion showed up and was like, okay, great. We need to build a power line to that project. And all of a sudden the Board of Supervisors was like, oh, we didn't think about that. It's like, okay, well, we have to have these conversations ahead of time to understand. We're pretty firm believers that, data centers don't belong near sensitive resources, schools, parks, communities. Half-mile buffer is a decent starting point, kind of dependent on the site. We're not like we don't necessarily think that should be a universal thing, but like a general understanding that we want to protect, environmentally sensitive resources and sensitive communities from industrial development. Um, Big fans as an organization, big fans of redevelopment, converting old warehouses, uh, even old shopping malls, into sort of something that is not producing tax revenue at the time to something that does produce tax revenue. Um, uh, Noise modeling, that is now, because of, once again, some of the bills that Chris talked about, Senate Bill 94 and House Bill 153, are now going to be the standard. And so we're big fans of that. We supported that bill. Another thing, we keep talking about sort of this bubble and planning for what's next. We recommend at a minimum a redevelopment plan, and sort of at the high end, if you want to really push the needle, something like a decommissioning bond, and understanding that, whether it's in 10 years or 50 years, that this industry could very well change and shift, and the needs could change, and local government should be prepared for what comes next. I do a lot of, I spend a lot of time in Waynesboro, Virginia, and there's, on the banks of the South River there's tons of DuPont facilities that are just vacant, that have been there forever. And that's because at the time, the understanding was like, oh, they'll be there forever. And now they're just vacant warehouses. And so understanding that, the economy shifts over time, and local government should have a plan for that. And then very briefly, I'll touch on community benefit agreements, a CBA. A CBA is a sort of a legally binding agreement between communities and developers. This allows community members to basically be a part of the process. This sort of opens the door up for real world benefits for the communities that have these facilities. That can be things like mitigation, new parks, local hiring and job training. We heard a little bit about, the support for Northern Virginia Community College, like building that into the plan. Community clean energy. We've seen examples in other states where it's like, okay, we're going to do, solar on sort of everybody within a mile of this. So everybody gets solar panels on their house, and they see those, but the very real world benefits. Of course, the cons of that mean that some people get in on that agreement and some people don't. And so we think this is something to consider, but some of those local policy suggestions like siting and transparency should come first. And so with that, I'll shift over to the next speaker.
Thank you. Michael Henley with Oregon.
Thank you, guys, and good morning to everybody here. I'm here speaking on behalf of Horrigan Construction. I oversee the Richmond office for the Horrigan team. We talked a little bit about some of the work that's taken place in Henrico County, and we're working for one of the larger developers that are there in QTS. This slide's a little bit about Horrigan. We've been in Virginia for a long time, a little over 30 years. We've got offices all across the state, but we are a Virginia builder. We did not go into Northern Virginia when the data center boom took off up there. We've stayed out of the Beltway. But as the work has continued to progress to the south, our teams have embraced these opportunities and have looked for places where we can deploy our resources. I think one of the best things that you can see on this slide are the people that are on here. And one of the things that I talk about as it relates to all of these different data center things, and Chris had a great slide about it, but I mean, we have project engineers, project managers, quality control people, safety people, a litany of different engineering types that are on these projects. The jobs that are created from these types of projects that are out there are phenomenal. They're great projects, they have great timelines, and frankly, the data center industry has a high bar that we all need to try to live up to, that rivals, working on federal projects or federal campuses like you guys have down here on some of the NAVFAC facilities and different things. As a company, we do a lot of different project types. We don't do just data centers, although there's a lot of that takes place. We're doing manufacturing projects and office buildings, senior living facilities, higher education, and many different healthcare projects and things of that nature. We also do focus a lot on highly sustainable projects. Most of you are probably familiar with down here, the Chesapeake Bay Brock Environmental Center. This is one of the projects that we are probably most proud of as an organization, but have worked on a number of different facilities that strive for meeting highly sustainable construction goals. And it's one of the things that we're proud to be able to bring to many of our data center customers, as well as some of the thought processes that our teams have supported. Years ago, we were talking about the different project types as it relates to mission critical. Our first data center project was with Capital One when they spun off, and you guys were talking about enterprise data centers. That was some of the early projects that were put into place. You can see some of the pictures here in the top left of some of the campuses. Oh, back up there. Some of the pictures here of some of the campuses in these hyperscale data center facilities. There you can see how dense they are and how much they try to pay attention to the land that they're utilizing. There's also some really interesting things in the defense space we can't show pictures of, but the defense industry really relies a ton on data center construction, and our team has been fortunate to be able to support that amongst a number of control centers that Dominion uses to be able to control the electric grid for the entire footprint that they support. So a number of different things there. I put this slide in here, very similar to what Chris had shown earlier, but I wanted to highlight this $15.3 billion that's here in the state of Virginia. And I think that one of the things that you hear about from an economic perspective across the entire country is what many refer to as a K-shaped economy right now. And the data center industry is doing a phenomenal job of supporting the Commonwealth and many other states across the country in great development and great economic development that is supporting our country and our facilities and everything. The state of Virginia is a huge beneficiary from that, and many projects have continued to move further south. Richmond has been able to support that. Louisa has been able to support that and be able to take on some of those projects. Culpeper in that region, Mecklenburg County. So there are many areas that are finding ways to do appropriate development to be able to support large-scale campuses and continue Virginia to be a great place. And I'll add this other piece too, is that it's not just a flash in the pan. As we think about our strategic plan for Horgan and what construction looks like long after the buildings are built, there will be day two work that takes place. There will be work that goes on inside of these facilities that Digital Realty and QTS and many others, technological advancements will come, and we will need to go back into these facilities, and we will need professionals in each community that can support some of these different data centers that are there. So I think that it's a wonderful testament to the economic benefits that much of this work has provided to our organization, our industry as a construction professionals, and our state as well.
Wonderful, thank you all. All right, we're going to jump into questions. We have had many great questions during the first panel and this panel coming in. So just as a reminder, please do scan the QR codes on your table to submit your questions. If we cannot address all of them today, we will be following up with information on our website. So the first question I have is for Mike with HRSD. You talked about the SWIFT program in your introduction, and we all know that flooding is such a concern here in Hampton Roads. So can you talk a little bit more about why Hampton Roads is or is not an ideal location for data centers due to flooding issues?
Right, so studies have shown Hampton Roads is number 2 at most risk from sea level rise and land subsidence. And the SWIFT program, early indications are that we may start to reverse some of the land subsidence issues as we recharge the aquifer. And SWIFT is significantly designed to reduce the loads of nitrogen and phosphorus to the Chesapeake Bay, but it's also going to create a sustainable source of groundwater. And the first phase of that should be completed by the end of the decade, and we're excited to see what 50 million gallons a day of water going back into the aquifer will do. We've been working with USGS on the land subsidence piece. And again, when we're talking about recovering some of the lost space from overuse of the aquifer, we're not talking about feet, but we're talking about gaining inches of that land back, and every inch can matter when we're talking about flooding issues at Hampton Roads.
Great, thank you. Very important issue. Next question for Alex. In Mecklenburg County, what type of tax revenue are you seeing and what has your county been able to utilize it for?
Yeah, so from the data center perspective, they pay a range of different taxes, but the primary revenue sources that you'll derive would be the real estate rate. They pay the same as anybody else, pay on the land and pay on the built improvements on that land, and they are quite a bit of value on those. You'll generate revenue off business personal property, and that includes, you'll have a choice there whether you want to set a separate tax rate, which I believe many communities in this Commonwealth have already, including ours, on the equipment and peripherals, which are the servers and some associated equipment inside the building, as well as have a tax rate that could be the regular business personal property tax rate on the other items in the facility, you know, desk, chairs, so on. And then you also generate revenues based on sales tax. And so this is an important point I want to make. While the computer equipment and peripherals are not eligible for the sales tax, and that is certainly the Commonwealth-wide conversation right now, everything else related to the data center is eligible for sales tax payments. So all of the construction material that go on the data center are eligible for sales tax. And so we do generate a considerable amount of sales tax revenue locally based on data center construction. And then on top of that, you have other forms of revenue. You have a utility consumption tax that will go up, obviously, with the power use. And then one that has really impacted Mecklenburg in a way that you wouldn't expect is the occupancy tax with respect to hotels. So we did a study in the last year about what our local hotel occupancy looked like. And on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights, we had occupancy of over 90% in our local market. Which for those of you who are unfamiliar is pretty much Virginia Beach in the middle summer levels of occupation, which for a rural county would be unthinkable otherwise. So there's a multitude of different sources, but the big ones are the real estate and the personal property. Now, what can you do with those? Well, I think this one slide earlier said come to a consensus on what you want, and I think that is vitally important. And in Mecklenburg's case, our first avenue was for school construction. So 10 years ago, if you took a profile of the schools in Mecklenburg County, the high school was from 1955, the middle school was from 1952, 3 of the 4 elementary schools were from 1961, 62, and then the last one we managed to build in 2005. And if you now took a snapshot today of where we're at, we have a high school that opened in 2022, a middle school that opened in 2022, an elementary school that just completed its first year of academic use, an elementary school that's under construction right now and will be open for not the next year, but the year after that. And we just acquired land for the 4th elementary school, and we'll be building that in the next few years. So over a 15-year window, we'll end up spending about $300 million in school construction. And oh, by the way, we did that without having to resort to the 1% sales tax, which we were empowered to use, like a few other counties were carved out to do. The other ones have used it. We have not. Thank you, General Assembly, from our counterparts across the Commonwealth for extending it to everyone else. But because of the data center industry, we did not have to use that tool. And so that's one great thing that we've been able to do with it. And we've been able to do some other stuff. We've been able to onboard EMS as career paid professionals and never have to blink about doing it, never have to worry about a tax increase. We added at one time about a 15% increase to our workforce by taking on EMS. And again, didn't have to worry about that whatsoever. So now we're trying to shift and figure out, okay, what is the next priorities? But those are some of the high-level items that we were immediately focused on achieving for our citizens. And of course, bringing down the rates. Chris, you're gonna have to update that slide because our tax rate after July 1st is gonna be 31 cents on the real estate. And we also have enacted for this upcoming year an 80-cent reduction on the vehicle personal property rate. So we are trying to give back to our citizens and ask less of them to contribute even while we are expanding in other areas.
Great, thank you so much, Alex. Kyle, next question is for you. So here in Chesapeake, we value our parks and our open space. Can you talk about the impacts and how developers can be good neighbors to the local environment and wildlife? What best practices have you seen or lessons learned?
Yeah, thanks, Lacey. So one of the things that we like to point out and address the elephant in the room, the tech industry is very well off. They have the money to do good projects if a local community asks them to do those things. And so we have seen developments of trail networks, of sort of micro parks, things like that. Another good project I wanted to highlight, this was in Loudoun County, a Compass data center project. It sort of came out in the rezoning process that a portion of their project was like a rare Northern Virginia specific geological and native plant community called the Northern Piedmont Moffat Barren Community. Is a globally rare ecosystem. And in the process, Compass agreed to reduce their footprint and to put like 14 acres of land in permanent conservation easement adjacent to Goose Creek in Loudoun County. And so like things like that, like being willing to adjust your proposals as things come out and do good by the community is like that type of stuff goes a really long way. There's tons, you know, the Elizabeth River Project, there's tons of nonprofits in this area that always need additional support to do the good work that they're doing. So thinking about, you know, long-term programs to support the community building that is happening across the region, like that sort of stuff. You know, a large part of it is like, if you can look at a project and say, oh, they're like, that's a good project. Does it pass the sniff test? That's like a good place to start.
Wonderful, thank you, Kyle. Michael, can you talk to us? We kind of touched on this even in the first panel, but can you talk a little bit about how data center construction has changed over the last 10 years? Because what we're hearing is we feel a lot that there's some assumptions made and it's based on previous projects, not what we're currently looking at for our community.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we talked about today was on water, and certainly that's a high degree of interest, particularly for this community down here. And I think that what you should have heard from the other panelists that were up here is that with these closed loop systems, the usage of water has gone drastically down. The other thing that's not really discussed as much is because of the systems that are being utilized and the efficiencies that are associated with these systems, the power utilization efficiency ratio for each one of these data centers has come down drastically. They used to be much, much higher. There's a ratio that you try to get close as you can to a 1.0. A 1.0 basically means that there's a full utilization of every wattage of power that goes into the facility for actual computing power. Now that's enhanced from what was closer to like a 2.0 or and then got to like a 1.65. Now we're at like 1.15, I think you could probably say. Out there's some pretty amazing systems that are put in place. So the computing power that's being brought into these facilities is causing footprints to shrink. And now you can put more utilization of the power inside of a smaller footprint for that same data center. And then you can still put lots of equipment and everything inside of it to be able to run these facilities. So they become more efficient in a number of different ways. Mm-hmm. And with smaller footprints, that's less impact from a site planning perspective. You can either A, put more facilities on a larger industrial campus to generate additional tax revenues, or you can decide that, you know, you've got enough on that particular location for a site that you guys are hoping to consider here.
Wonderful, thank you. So noise is something that has come up for us. It's coming up in our conversation and our questions here. I feel like a couple of you could probably address noise concerns from different aspects. So can I open it up for the impact of noise from data centers on the community, the local wildlife, that kind of thing?
I can jump in and get us started. I know that there are a lot of communities that are very focused on the generators and the potential sound, you know, the noise that is generated from the generators. I know that these data center companies spend a lot of time making sure that they are putting in appropriate startup cycles for any one of these facilities. We spend a lot of time working with them during our integrated systems testing and everything that needs to happen so that they can be certain that these facilities are going to operate appropriately. And there are schedules for each of these generators to be able to cut on during the daytime, not at night when a bunch of other people are trying to sleep or anything like that. And you really cannot hear the sounds of these things. The hum that people have talked about in Northern Virginia, that's old technology. You don't hear that anymore. You know, frankly, we talked about the potential for distribution facilities. We build distribution facilities as well for many different clients that we support. However, you don't have backup alarms after the facility is built. The construction can be a little bit noisy when things are going on, but any construction is going to be a little bit like that. But once you move into operation, these facilities are pretty benign.
Okay. Anybody else want to take that one?
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think a lot of what was just said reflects our lived experience. From a noise perspective, the construction is definitely where it's at. They're large-scale construction sites, just like you would have for any other large-scale construction. And so you do have a lot of dump trucks coming in and out, a lot of beeping, a lot of work hours. You know, it's especially on a campus, they're going to have an elongated workday compared to what you would see in a lot of other construction projects. And so you can hear that from the noise and you can see that from the lights. But once they're operational, we found the same. So especially if they're on a campus model. If they're on the campus model, you'll never hear any noise off the site at all. On the site, it depends, of course, where some of these facilities are put. If they are shielded by the buildings, you'll never hear anything on the other side of the building. And then if you're even in, so Vince and I were in a data center recently, and you know, you could have a conversation completely on the inside. You never hear any of the generating equipment, even on the outside of that building. So it really depends on how large they are, how spaced they're, but that's what you're supposed to do from our perspective. If you're the local government, you enforce the appropriate setbacks. You tell them where they can put their generating equipment, and then you solve the problem. What you saw in Northern Virginia in that picture, you won't see that in Mecklenburg County. And you won't see that in a lot of other places as you go forward. But yeah, we've not had any noise complaints from operations.
Yeah, I'll just kind of conclude. I think a lot of it comes down to decisions made on the front end impact how the community is impacted or feels they're being impacted on the back end. And so, you know, if you live in a neighborhood and your backyard is now, you know, abutting diesel generators, you're going to hear those when those turn on. And so a lot of sort of those impacts that are being felt are because siting decisions were made poorly on the front end. And so if you're really smart about where these facilities go and what's nearby to those facilities, the impacts are likely to be low. And, you know, as I touched on, because the General Assembly passed some legislation this year, noise modeling is now sort of the status quo. It's built in. We think that's progress. And, you know, if those studies are being done on the front end and data centers are sited properly, there should be no issues.
I might also add that with many AI data centers that are coming online, the level of redundancy that's required inside of these facilities is not as high as some of the other types of data centers. I think Chris's presentation alluded to that a little bit. With that, less generators. So they can actually afford to go down in some of these facilities for short periods of time. And because they have redundancy on other facilities around the country, they can still process AI requests.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Is there an opportunity to use treated wastewater in the process for facility construction and for cooling?
Absolutely. So that gets to basically water reuse 101. You're trying to match water quality for water use. And we actually have an example where we're doing this currently at our Atlantic treatment plant in Virginia Beach, where the outfall from that plant runs right through the dam neck base that the U.S. Navy has out there. And they've actually tapped into that outfall pipe. They pull water out, they run it through a heat exchange for their steam production at the base, put it back in the outfall, and then it goes to the Atlantic Ocean. Looking at this, one of the big issues is Hampton Roads is not set up with purple pipe, where basically you have a reclaimed water system, of network of piping in the ground already. So as you look at doing that and taking treated effluent, or in the case of our SWIFT program, the SWIFT water, and moving that out elsewhere, the cost to put that extra set of pipes in the ground starts to become a little bit prohibitive. But siting of these, if they could be close to a site, we've looked at issues where there may be a large wastewater pipe. There's a large volume of raw wastewater available. You might be able to put a small treatment plant, a scalping plant online, treat it to the quality that you need for the cooling, and then put it back into the system and move it on down line to the wastewater treatment plant. Now we heard from Amos this morning talking about they did need potable water quality, real clean water. So as the technology changes, maybe that need is not there, and they can use other types of water.
Mhm. As a utility provider with being HRSD, what is the importance of communication between the locality and the utilities before the projects happen?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. That's a big piece for us. Water is not limitless. Wastewater capacity is not limitless. You heard me talk about 14 plants ranging from 25,000 gallons to 54 million gallons. That's design capacity. There's already wastewater going there. We're constantly monitoring collection system capacity, treatment plant capacity. If you can't move it from the site to the treatment plant without it spilling over into the streets, that's just as bad as not being able to treat it once it gets to the wastewater plant. So being involved early, knowing that capacity is available in the collection system, knowing capacity is available at the wastewater plants is imperative. So I challenge your community leaders in here, please involve the water provider, your utility departments, and HRSD as you're talking about these and having these discussions early on to ensure that capacity is there.
Great. Thank you. So, wrap up remarks. If you could each take under a minute, we want to be respectful of everybody's time. But if you have any closing remarks that you want to touch on quickly, I'll invite that now.
I basically just said involve us early. Just recognize that there are, water's not forever. There is a capacity limit on water. There is a capacity limit on wastewater. We need to start to recognize that. And again, as these projects start to come to light, as you start considering it, please just involve the right parties early on to have the discussions on availability so that we can ensure capacity demand is met and that we ultimately are protecting the environment.
The one thing I would point out just to close is the process when it comes to local government decision making is a lot of times not going to have all the details finalized by the time you're making zoning decisions. And that's what it's supposed to be. So just because we don't know some of these details, we don't know the final engineering, people haven't given us some things, that's okay. That's not because things are being hidden. That's just the natural order of the development process. Zoning always comes here, but many times the actual designs of the facilities, the actual technologies that are going to be used, their capacity model, all that stuff comes later on in the development process. So you might not actually have all the information when it comes before a planning commission or when it comes before the city council or a board of supervisors. But that's not because something nefarious is happening. That's because that's exactly what's supposed to happen along the development curve. Zoning, legislative approval is here. Zoning permitting is here. Building permitting is down here. Regulatory agencies are somewhere down here, and then the actual building and construction is way down there. So zoning's always going to be so far in advance that we're not going to have the precise, details on every single thing, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of my takeaway would be, like look at what has happened around the rest of the state. And, as this region, as Chesapeake, as the broader Hampton Roads region is considering data center deployment and development, learn from the good, learn from the bad, avoid the mistakes that have been made, take what has been done well in places like Mecklenburg and others and figure out how to make that work for your community. I think it goes without saying that mistakes have been made and things have been done well. And y'all are in the unique position of, sort of being able to look back to the past 5 to 10 years and say, what do we want to avoid? What pitfalls do we want to avoid? And, how can we get this right? And, take some of those learned experiences and do the best you can.
I think one of the things that I would say relative to Hampton Roads as a region, this is a defense-heavy part of the world here. And when you think about technology and you think about the applications of technology and how that is going to play out, and who will lead through the remainder of this century on the geopolitical scale. I would look at this as an opportunity for this region to get on board and to utilize this and to put some of the great leaders that you guys have in this region to be able to support and to enhance this community through the use of technology when we're going against, you know, some pretty sizable countries that are out there that are trying to compete with us on a technology front. This is the grassroots efforts that are taking place. These will be the jobs that will that will support that industry, and it'll be a great thing for our country to be able to see where we go in the future with all of this.
Thank you. Round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you again, and I'm going to turn it over to David Ropp, our chair of the Chesapeake Alliance.
As we conclude today's program, I want to thank our speakers, moderators, and panelists for sharing their expertise and insights with us. Please join me again in thanking them for their time and contributions. I also want to thank Barrett, Lacey, Dawn, and Shelley. They were the main people. They were the engine that put this together. They did an excellent job. I'm blown away with this presentation. Also want to thank the Conference Center for hosting us today. They did a great job as well. I also want to thank you all for investing your time this morning, engaging in this important community conversation. Whether you arrived this morning supportive of data centers, skeptical of them, simply seeking information, we hope you leave with a deeper understanding of the opportunities, challenges, and considerations associated with this rapidly evolving industry. We also hope today's discussion serves as a reminder that complex community issues are best addressed through respectful dialogue, thoughtful analysis, and a willingness to learn from one another. If you found today's event valuable, would like to stay engaged in conversations about Chesapeake's future, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter at chesapeakealliance.org. Follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I believe our speakers will hang out for a little while, so feel free to grab them for your individual questions. But thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.